IT Pro TV, an easy, entertaining approach to online IT training. Access over 2,000 hours of up-to-date, high-quality video content live and on demand via Chromecast, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, PC, or your mobile device. IT Pro TV's premium membership grants access to all courses, transcripts, virtual machine labs, and transcender practice exams. Corporate and group pricing are available. For a free 7-day trial and 30% off the life of your account, visit itpro.tv/securityweekly and use the code SW30. Has your network been breached? Cybereason can help you answer this question. Cybereason products hunt for threats within your network and eliminate them in real time. To Cybereason, real time means within seconds. Founded by former military hackers who don't play by the rules, they've built this experience into their platform. Harness ingenuity and imagination, not just code, to defeat hackers. Cybereason. Disrupt the adversary and let the hunt begin. NetSparker, the developers of desktop and cloud-based web application security scanners that enable you to automatically identify vulnerabilities in your web applications and web services. NetSparker scanners employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities with their proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at netsparker.com or email contact@netsparker.com. Onapsis, the leading provider of solutions to protect ERP systems from cyber attacks. Customers can secure their SAP and Oracle Business Critical platforms from espionage, sabotage, and financial fraud risks. Visit them on the web at onapsis.com.
It's the security news! Woo! Aren't you excited, Michael?
I can't. I've been dancing over here.
It's
exciting.
I can't contain myself. Oh boy, I feel like it should be like a start. I'm getting confused. Like Startup Security Weekly, Paul Security Weekly, Startup Security Weekly, Paul Security Weekly. No, this is Paul Security. We're not talking about MVP and exit strategies and all that stuff.
That's tomorrow.
That's tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to talk about all that stuff. So tune in to Startup.
We're talking about cyber insurance tomorrow too. So it's kind of fun. We're going to talk about being a startup, helping people do their cyber insurance, and there's some interesting stuff with that. But then we'll talk about what that also means for startups and what do they need to do. So tomorrow's gonna be fun.
You can subscribe to all of our shows actually. SecurityWeekly.com/subscribe. We have Startup Security Weekly, which is Michael and I. We have Enterprise Security Weekly, which is John and I. We have Hack Naked News, which is myself and some other kind of expert commentator, Jason Wood. Joins us every once in a while. Don Pizzette from IT Pro TV. Some of our sponsors chime in. And we've got new shows coming up as well. Secure Digital Life is another one of those just getting into the field. We'll appreciate Secure Digital Life. But of course, we've got Paul Security Weekly. We did a deep dive with David Conrad, primarily into DNS, which was just fascinating. Carrie Roberts, who's like one of the unsung heroes of our industry. John and I have kind of built our respective teams, and we're kind of learning about each other's different teams, Michael. And, you know, Carrie's one of those people that's like, wow. I'm like, dude, she's awesome. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, I know. Carrie's awesome. So we're going to bring her on the show live to do some more technical segments. She's definitely on the list. John has a great team at Black Hills Information Security. But now we're here talking about the security news, and there's a lot of interesting articles, very somewhat controversial articles, I think, this week, Michael.
I like controversy.
Yeah, David Shackelford, who's another hero in our industry, to say it mildly. I mean, my comment on this one, dude, was like, preach it, brother. Like, you know, like Dave, like, cuts right to the chase in all of his writings and his teachings, right? I mean, that's what Dave does. And, you know, Dave was like, you know, this is the more InfoSec changes, the more it stays the same. But, I mean, he hit the hot button points, Michael, that I think we've been talking about on the show for probably 10 years or more. And he said, you know, basically authentication is killing us, passwords. Vendors are still putting out software and hardware with no security. And vendors are making laughable claims trying to secure the rest of us. And organizations aren't fixing the stuff. I mean, he laid it out for everyone. Like, he put it out there. I want to get your thoughts on that, Michael.
Well, so I'm kind of taken with two thoughts, and there's probably going to be more that kind of trickle in. So we've been preaching about this for 10 years. We've been preaching doom and gloom for 10 years. Apparently, we haven't done anything for a decade, and we're still here.
Yeah, and this is the double-edged sword that represents this kind of post. Like, well, nothing has changed. You could say that looks bad for security vendors. It looks bad for organizations. It looks bad for people defending networks. And it looks bad for all of us that have defended networks and tested networks and are trying to help organizations as well, right? Like, are we all just failing, Michael?
Yeah, see, I think no, and I don't think that we are, because I've made comments like this in the past, and I've been taken a task for making comments like this in the past, and people point out that it is different. So from a category perspective, sure. For whatever reason, it's maybe like passwords are my Paul DNS thing, but I've been way too deeply involved with it, and I'll say,
I like how you put that. They're my Paul DNS thing.
Yeah, I didn't realize how awesome you were with DNS, but
I try.
like so for example, like I wrote somebody the other day, right? It's RSA time, so this is where we declare again for the 25th year in a row that the password is dead, and this is the last year of the password. We can do it for another couple of thousand years. It's not going to go away. But here's what everybody misses when you do that. The password isn't the problem. The password is a simple single factor of authentication. So if what you're saying is single factor authentication is no longer valid, great, I'm bought in on you. If you want to come back and say we've made key management of that, right? The single factor way too complex. I'm bought in on that as well. But like to just keep bitching about it and not actually looking at the fundamental challenges to it, breaking it down into the three constituent components, right? How you set it up, how you maintain it, how you use it, and then looking at ways to advance it and just kind of hoping somebody's going to come along, and we'll go, oh, it'll be multi-factor, that'll do it. Which PS is still relying on a password. Yeah, it's.
No, well, hold on. I slightly disagree. So one thing, we're in episode 501. Early on in the Security Weekly history, I've been quoted as saying, passwords are just so easy to abuse. And I said it exactly like that because we have it recorded in a sweeper. And I think that's true. Now, the thing that fast forward several years to today, episode 501, the attack I was talking about earlier where one of my friends on Facebook was compromised, their credentials were stolen via social engineering, essentially, and their message was sent out to all of their friends, very akin to the Sammy Worm that hit MySpace, Sammy Kamkar, who's a dear friend and an awesome security researcher. However, the thing that gets me is when my wife is texting me saying that she has a security issue, like this is something that first and foremost I need to pay attention to because it's my family member or my friend that is compromised. Also, it's something that is an issue that we need to discuss on our shows, not just with the technical people, but something for like secure digital life. We need to address with the masses as well.
Absolutely.
And I was thinking about it and I said, you're only going to succumb to this attack because of a couple of reasons. Like one of your friends gets compromised. Okay. Two, you're going to click on the attack. The attack, as far as I could tell from a very quick and dirty kind of forensic analysis, was they brought you to a site where they ask you for your Facebook credentials again. So you're only really a victim if you enter your Facebook credentials again, right? That's how they were doing the credential harvesting. And thinking about that, okay, if you have my credentials, if Facebook just implemented in the past few weeks the support for, what is that two-factor authentication scheme?
The hardware key. Like
the hardware key, the
else.
open one. So as a result of that, I bought some YubiKeys and I'm using them personally. And my advice to my wife was, I'm going to issue you a two-factor authentication key. And like the text back is like, question mark, like, what's that? So I think that's part of what's wrong with this whole scenario too.
I completely agree with that.
Also, but I think that two-factor authentication in this scenario, if I do click a link, okay, that happens, albeit as much as I try and educate my wife, and she's very well educated after being married to me for 10 years, right? she knows not to enter her Facebook credentials. Even if she does, that two-factor authentication was like an aha moment for me. Like, you still can't log into my Facebook account because I have that.
Right.
So in that case, I think it's a good thing. No?
No. Just so we're clear, I think two-factor authentication is great. What I was unclear about was what I see are people say, yeah, we're going to kill the password, so we're going to go two-factor authentication. And I'm going, but there's still a password in that. Like, you didn't kill the password. No. But that's why I say, like, when we cry about, it's kind of like we used to do this when we were teaching the CISSP. We would say, is DES broken? People go, yeah, it's totally broken. No, DES is not broken. You can brute force a 56-bit key in now a matter of minutes. Cool. Does that make it broken? No. It means it's insufficient for the task at hand. Is a single factor of authentication in the proliferation of what we've done on the internet currently sufficient? Yeah, I'll bet you right now for probably 80-90% of the things that we do online, it's fine. It's the 10% that we've got to go focus on. And the thing that I posit aloud, and I clearly haven't figured it out or figured out how to monetize it. But what I see a lot of times, lest I turn into another, it's funny, I spend a lot of time, right, doing communication and looking at how to shift and influence. So it's always awkward for me to like look at how our industry has done security awareness so poorly. And so we're like, okay, I've got a budget of X number of dollars and I'll put together a couple slides. I don't get it. Like, I don't understand why we think that's going to help, because if we sat down with people and actually explained how passwords work, you know what happens? But it takes about 20 minutes or so. They suddenly ask really intelligent questions. Mm-hmm. If you give them a little bit of a challenge to create their own password. So, by the way, typically the way this would work when I used to do these workshops is people would come in and I would ask them how many passwords they have to manage. And so I haven't actively taught this in a couple years, but 28, 30 passwords, which is actually still pretty close to average for most people. Mm-hmm. And then I'd give them like 5 minutes to just let the venom out and attack me for all the passwords that they hate and how they're complex and they're not consistent, everything else. Okay, we're good. 10 minutes later, they're choosing 32 character passwords that they can completely remember. So it's not a problem once they break it down, once they explain it, once they understand it, and then they always go ahead.
But in this case, I can have a 32 character password, but I'm being tricked into giving that to an attacker.
No, I agree with you. What I was going to point out is that once they do that, then people start to say things like that, and they go, well, wait a minute then. And so suddenly they go, well, so then I should have a different password for every site. Yes. Well, how do I do that? Well, they have password managers. Oh, well, tell me more about that. And so what happens then is that we've given them that gateway to have the conversations with us, and then suddenly it's well, what's this two-factor thing? Because, I mean, go look at any like community bank that's done the work and they reach out to their user base and they say, hey, to better protect your bank account, we can give you this dongle token thing, right? And they spend time actually figuring out how to message it. They find remarkable uptake on it. And they say, well, yeah, it might cost you an extra $10. Yeah, it's good. People will pay it. Warcraft, right? Blizzard did that. Mm-hmm. World of Warcraft. They're having a huge problem with people, I don't know, hacking accounts or something. And they made that work and people were happy to pay the extra dollars on it. So I think what happens is, we get caught up in our bubble. In security, we always look at the downside of risk. It's always fascinating because for us in security, risk is always bad. But risk is actually just uncertainty, right? And then there can be an upside to it. Like you can take a risk up to whatever your tolerance is, and if it works out, you get a big reward, right? And if it doesn't work, well, then it doesn't. That's what we tend to focus on. So it's easy to look at.
I think it's a matter of convincing users, Michael, as you've started down this path that, hey, there's like 3 different tiers that I'm hearing. One is I need to have a secure password or a longer password, right? Like something is not easily guessable. Like that's the first level. The second level is I need to have a different password for maybe not every site, but most sites, right? Like, and those are fall in different categories. So I need to have a couple, like multiple different passwords that I can remember. Then the third is I need this extra level of protection that two-factor affords me, because someone may trick me into giving me my password, and it might be a secure, air quotes, password, but I need that extra level of protection.
Yeah,
if we could get users to get down those 3 different steps.
But we can't. Here's the trick. We can, right? I just saw like one of the articles that that kind of set me off this week was it cited something that the average cost to reset a password at a help desk is $70 a reset. I'd like to know who's paying that fee, because every time I talk to somebody, either they've already automated password resets or it's like $10 a call. Yeah. But even at $10 a call, the thing I look at then is then why aren't we actually sitting people down and investing 30 minutes a person and teaching them this one time, letting them feel good with it, right? Make a game out of it. And then, hey, you've earned your YubiKey and your password manager license. Right. Awesome. Thanks for the good work. And hey, if you got any other questions, I'm here for you. What I found is every time we meet people where they're at and we explain it just like you did and give them a chance to play with it. That's always the trick. We always seem to want to interrupt them when they're busy on deadline with something that we've deemed important. We never meet them when it's interesting or important to them. It's like, here's another trick on this topic. People always say to me, how do I teach my kids how to secure their social media? I always say, cool. Well, start with you. Ask your kids how they would secure your social media. They go, no, that's not what I'm saying. I want to secure my kids. I go, our kids are freaking smart, man. Let them take a look at your stuff. Tell them what you see. Have a good conversation about it, and then see where you can go from there. So if I go back to Shaq's post, we have similar scenarios. I don't think they're the same, and he says they're, albeit in different ways. I think our attacks have changed. I think the monetization of things have changed. I think that we as an industry still look at the extreme negatives of stuff and then extrapolate that as and that's what's going to happen. And I think the risk of that is that this is why we are worried about burnout. This is why things feel demoralizing for us at times. I tell you what, I've had 3 phone calls just today with people that are completely jazzed about our industry. They are excited. They see opportunity. They like the shift that's happening. They feel that people in the company are listening to them, that their influence is on the increase. So I think that's great. By the way, you and I didn't go to RSA this week. Maybe we could be a little happier because of it.
Well,
right?
Let me take you down a peg. So there's my story number 4, which is basically in Europe. There is this regulatory mandate that says, hey, in addition to providing your information about your credit card, we want you to provide a PIN number or password. And the pushback is, and I quote, there will be some lost sales as when we implement the verified by Visa, MasterCard secure card scheme, which is what it's being called. And I quote, not because people are put off, but because people forget their passwords and simply can't complete the purchase. And that's exactly what we're talking about now, Michael. Same topic, right? It's that it's not because users are inconvenienced by the extra step. It's because the extra step means they have to remember a password. And I think that's a fundamental flaw, going back to what we said, like I need to have a secure password. It needs to be different for every site, and I need to have 2-factor. If we can somehow streamline that process for end users, maybe we're in better shape. And maybe in this retail scenario, we're in much better shape. And it's disconcerting to me that the pushback is, well, users can't remember their passwords, and that's why we're not going to implement this security measure. Ugh.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not sure if I'd have to go back and look at it all. I'm not sure that's a good excuse. I'm also not sure it's the real excuse. I'm acutely aware lately that as security gets more exciting to everybody, it's great air cover for everything. You don't want to do that, blame security. You don't want to do that, blame security. Don't want to do that, blame security. But here's the thing that I keep looking at, right? And I'm sorry Jack's not with us because I've obviously not been a big fan of chip and pin. For the record, I think technology-wise, it's absolutely fascinating. I looked at it purely economically, and I said, okay, cool, right? We know my question, right? What's the problem we're trying to solve? People go, well, it's fraud. Well, actually, fraud, at least in the U.S., has been historically low. And then what I predicted, and this is going like almost 3 years ago, is I said, hey, take a look, and here's what's going to happen. We're going to go chip and pin. It's going to cost us hundreds of billions of dollars. And in the end, you're just going to be an exceptionally efficient lever to transfer from card present fraud to card not present fraud. Look at all the stories coming out this year saying, hey, guess what? Card not present fraud is up. So it's not surprising that the EU comes out and says, okay, hey, I got an idea here. We're going to start putting some additional controls on top of it. Now, I think in the notion that people can't remember their passwords, I'm not buying it. Just to be fair, I don't think that's it. I think it's actually simpler as that's a really good emotional hook that somebody grabbed onto, and they're probably worried about the actual potential for abandonment of online sales. And if you look at one of the other things that was happening at the same time as we started pushing a chip and pin was adoption of online retailing skyrocketing. So that the fraud's going to start to match that. And I have not looked at recent fraud levels, but my instinct is the amount of fraud is still well within a tolerable / acceptable / manageable level. And the fear of abandoned sales and carts from any additional steps to it. I don't know if you guys look at this. It's called the 3-click rule on websites. Now, I don't know if that's still valid. I've not valid. But like the idea, if you're doing a retail site, is if it takes somebody more than 3 clicks to get to what they want, they're not going to do it. And because there's so many choices now, if you're looking at me and I'm trying to sell something and you're saying, okay, listen, I want them to have to register, then you've got to accept the cookies, then you're going to have to do a 2-factor password, then you're going to put in your credit card, then every time you're going to buy something, I want you to put in another code. Then screw you, bro, I'm not doing it. And I'm looking at that as a retailer going, I don't own any of it anyway. Go ahead, do it. I'm good. Now, flip it around. What's the consumer liability, at least in the U.S., what's consumer liability if your card is compromised?
Oh, it's minimal. I tell you
Zero.
what. I will
zero.
give you a very recent example of that. My card was compromised. I had charges on there that weren't mine. The fraud detection kicked in, and I was like, yeah, no. I'm like, that definitely, it was like a gas station in Massachusetts or whatever. I'm like, yeah, that wasn't me. Like, new card showed up the next day.
Yep.
All's good. I wasn't liable for any of the fees.
Yep. It's interesting.
And that's me, security professional, and my wife, I've educated on that. Like, what
it's
happened?
funny.
I don't know.
When that used to happen to me, and I would go back and try to track it, and I'd call the company. I'm like, all right, I got the details. Like, dude, it doesn't matter. We issued you a new card. We're good. It's not worth tracking down. But so the thing that's interesting about that is, so when you go back and you look at like the late '90s, when we were really starting to ramp up PKI, like 96, 97. We started looking at like all these things that we could do in order to better secure online transactions. And people were like, how are we? I mean, think about how much we've had to figure out just around our earlier conversation with DNSSEC and keys and key signing keys and all the stuff that we were just talking about an hour ago. Okay, well, try to now imagine doing that for consumers and then having multiple certificates that were technically the same standard but didn't actually work with each other because you had a couple variable fields, and once you use the variable field, all bets are off. Okay, so that's when the credit card companies came out and said, okay, I've got an idea. And it started with like $200 liability, then it was $100 liability, and then somebody else came out with $50. Like within months, it was zero liability. And then for a while, it was zero liability except with your debit cards. Yeah, no, look, it's zero liability now across everything, and good luck. And because they said, because think about it, if you're a bank and I'm getting a cut every time you use my card, well, then it's in my interest to let you use my card. If I'm a retailer, right, there's a certain risk that I'm going to take. And we've all been on sites where some want less information, some want more information. And everybody adjusts to whatever they think is realistic. So
what I think is interesting too, Michael, is when I look at LastPass, for example, they actually, I could only get working the like $40 YubiKey. And what I found frightening was every time I need to access all of my LastPass passwords, I had to put my password in, give my token, and then I'm like, well, what if I lose my token? And then everything you read online is like, well, you need to have 2 tokens. Okay, so now I'm $80 in, right? And I have to be security aware enough and technical enough to say, okay, I got to get 2 tokens, right? Which I have now. I have 2 tokens. I authenticate both of them to LastPass. Like add them into the database. I keep one locked in my desk drawer for emergency purposes.
That's your HSM.
Yeah, and I keep another one on me, right? And that's my access to LastPass. Right. Is that a level? Is that akin to having 2 keys to my car? Like my wife has one and I have one, so we both have. Like the complexity of it all concerns me in terms of authentication, which. Getting back to the article, right? Like Shaq identified. I mean, he said passwords. I deem it as authentication. Like that's still an issue for me in making that accessible to everyone. That not only do we have to worry about passwords, right? Not only do I need the key fob to unlock my car, I need the key to start it. That process seems pretty good, and then I have a backup. But when you talk about in the digital realm, like how far are we before that just becomes like table stakes, right? I feel like we're kind of far away from that.
I think we're close to it.
Or are we close? I don't know.
I think it still comes down to, right, and this is where in security we tend to have these things that, I can do it, so I should do it. So let's go back. I'm going to circle around, but so the retailers push back against the security. We say, we're going to make it more secure. I think the fundamental question has to be, does it need to be more secure? And I get it. If you're listening to this right now and you're going, Michael, stop. Of course. No, the answer is not always have more security. But to your point then, when we look at authentication, are there opportunities to authenticate better? Yeah. You know what I still haven't seen us figure out yet is better identity proofing. Right? So, which is, and there's different levels of it, and we're starting to figure those things out as well. There was a concept floated maybe 20 years ago, and it comes back every now and then of like digital notaries. It's almost like back to like the key signing parties, like the PGP days, and things that you can do with Web of Trust.
In our interview about the keys for the DNS servers. Wow.
Well, because there's still trust, right? I mean, there's still some level of trust that we establish because we have a physical proximity to something. So I think what's interesting is we need to go look at these things more. And in fact, I mean, if somebody's listening and they know the universities that are looking at this, I know Cornell for a while was really looking at trust and looking at the models between online trust and offline trust. And for a while, Microsoft was doing that with their trustworthy computing stuff. Like they were pushing on that really hard as well. I think that what you're pointing out is that now what's interesting is I have not yet gone the hardware route, but I recently I ended up replacing my cell phone, and then I had a battery defect, so I ended up replacing it again. And I have to tell you what, replacing the first set, it was such a pain switching off of Google Authenticator, so I went to Authy. And then I really reevaluated my strategies with everything. I got to tell you what, by the time I, quote, broke it again and I had to get to the new phone, I was in love with it, and it's made stuff so easy. So now anything that allows me to use Google Authenticator, it's like, yes, please. And now it's an Authy, and I have 2 different ways to do it, and it's a backup and multiple paths. And it's made things really simple for me. Now, to be fair, I think it could still be a little bit simpler. But gosh, that was pretty easy. And I think, so I guess what I would say is we're making it more ubiquitous to be able to do multi-factor authentication. I think we're seeing companies invest time and energy into explaining it better. And I think we're seeing more people say, oh, cool, that's for me. And I think, last piece on this, I think if we could start teaching our kids and letting them teach everybody else, I think we'll be better off for it.
No, I agree. Along the lines of trust, now I could go to Microsoft and based on your
I set you up for that. Yeah.
Set me up for Microsoft, but I really want to go to Google and talk about no firewalls, no problem for Google. This is the quote.
That was interesting.
This quote blew me away. This is a quote from the article about Google, and I believe they were presenting at RSA. Google says the solution was to flip the problem on its head and treat every network as untrusted, which we've said we should do, grant access to services based on what was known about the users and their device. All access to services must be authenticated, authorized, and unencrypted connections. And that's how kind of like Google's security strategy rolls now. They're like, no, firewalls, whatever. Like basically there's a service. If you're authorized to use this service, then you can use it. And if you are using it, it's over an encrypted channel. This is like the security utopia we've tried to build for so many years, Michael. Yep. And Google's like,
do you remember
we got that figured out. Well, according to their claims in this article, which you can read on the wiki, but...
That was all the Jericho Project stuff, right? And the collapsing perimeter and being able to move it down. It's listen, I get to tell you what, I keep looking at the stuff that Google's doing relative to security. They're pushing Apple, they're pushing Microsoft, they're pushing the industry. And every now and then I hear people say stuff like, whoa, they're going too fast. They shouldn't deprecate SHA-1 yet, right? That was the last rub. I don't know, man. I think they're doing good stuff and they're pushing it. But what I'm encouraged by,
aside from Android, but
and that is an interesting piece to it. But what I'll say, and because I'm not on Android, I don't spend a lot of time in the Google Play Store. But what I will tell you is, doesn't it seem, at least to us, that they're putting their money where their mouth is? I mean, they were the ones. Look, I was the person who said we shouldn't force Google or anybody else to use SSL. And right around the time I took a big stand on that, Google's like, yeah, we did the analysis. It's not more expensive. It's a good strategy. And my point was good. Like, if as a business it's a good strategy and you like it, I'm all for it. But at the time, I mean, I had come off a project where every time we wanted to do a VPN, I had to buy a new card to put in the router to be able to handle the processing. I was like, that's expensive. Google's like, yeah, actually, we figured out how it's not expensive. We're good with it. Oh, cool. So, I mean, I like that they're pushing the envelope on it, and I think it's good. I think it's dangerous for somebody who's listening to this. Go, oh, Google doesn't have firewalls. Good. I don't need them either. No. Yeah, Google did a lot of stuff here.
No, yeah, it's a lot of. It's interesting. It takes me back to like when I was the firewall engineer for a university, and there were people I didn't realize it at the time that were much wiser and smarter than I that said firewalls aren't the answer, and I was like, well. Like 16 years ago, and even today, as you were saying, Michael, like, a lot of times firewalls are the answer just because we haven't figured all the rest of this stuff out. And they were like, basically saying exactly what Google is saying. Like, why do we need a firewall if we can authenticate users, we can encrypt, we can verify which services should be accessed by an individual person or group of people or set of systems or an individual system? If we can do that, then what do we need firewalls for? Like, why is that a thing? And at the time, I was like, no, we need firewalls, and here's why. And then as I progressed through my career, I look back on it, and I'm like, wow, like those people were like way ahead of it. And actually, it's funny. Have you ever heard of Shibboleth?
Yeah.
So the person who was saying those things about firewalls was one of the founders of the Shibboleth project that I worked alongside of. We've interviewed him on the show because he's a brilliant person and a super, super nice person as well. His name's Steve Carmody. Awesome person. I had a lot of great conversations with Steve after that, after he was like, poo-poo your firewall. And I was like, who is this guy poo-pooing my firewall? It was Steve. And I'm like, now today, I'm like, yeah, no, he has every right to poo-poo my firewall because he's way smarter than I'll ever be. But yeah, it was Steve Carmody, one of the founders of the Shibboleth project. So yeah.
Well, that's actually pretty cool.
Well, and that makes sense, right? Because Shibboleth's all about authenticating users to give them access to only what they should have access to. And that's the world that he was living in.
So think about how much stuff has changed in the last 10 to 15 years that we've been doing this in terms of, I mean, it hit me a couple days ago, well, maybe a couple months ago, but there was a time where if you had a desktop computer at your desk, that was a big deal. Mm-hmm. Then if you got a laptop, that was whoa, you were somebody in the company.
Had a 14.4 modem, or God forbid, cutting edge 28.8 modem.
Sit down
on your laptop. Like you had the phone jack built into your laptop.
You remember? Yeah, you could pop it out. Oh
yeah. My first 486 laptop, I think, had the one that you would pop out. And you put the phone jack right in.
Put the phone jack right into it.
That was cutting edge.
Exactly right.
Cutting edge technology.
Well, so think about it.
We're showing our age now, Michael. We're old.
We had very centralized ways of doing our connections. Now, I've got 2 or 3 devices around me that can access it. In fact, I'm thoroughly impressed the number of times, like if I'll do like a speed test, I'm out in public LTE network, I'm faster in public than I am at my house with a dedicated connection. So the point is, yeah, it's all changed. But here's what's also changed within that. The devices that we put in our pockets and call phones are more powerful than the computers we were just talking about.
Yeah.
They were more powerful than those computers could ever be. So we can collect more points about things. We can collect more data. We can process it faster. We can transmit it better. We can act on it in ways that we dreamed about 20 years ago that they just weren't possible. Because what I've noticed with a lot of the briefings I've taken in the last year or so is people will say something and I'll say, all right, hold on, I got to stop you. I heard this 20 years ago. What changed? They're like, here's what changed. And I'm like, oh, cool. All right, so it works now. Show me. Cool. Right, and Bob Stratton told us about that. He's like, there's some stuff that they looked at in the 70s that they could theorize, but they couldn't execute. But now they can. So I think it's good, and maybe again this becomes a model. I don't have a dog in the hunt with firewalls or not. I think, as you just suggested, there are going to be situations where the answer is yes, you need a firewall, and there's going to be situations where it's I don't think a firewall is a good choice for you. Like I don't know what you're trying to get accomplished there, and that's great because if in security, if we start asking some of those questions and just understanding the answers, not dogmatically, and not because it means we don't have value. It just means what's the right thing for us to do. We've got an enormous amount of pressure on us, right? Security is now in the headlines everywhere. So every time we see somebody say, well, people don't care about security. No, not true. They may not understand it. They may not know what to ask. They may not know how to express it. Trust me, they care. It is top of mind everywhere. There's a ton of pressure to do something now. Oh, P.S. Don't screw up. There's as much pressure both directions.
And people call security different things. Like it's integrity, it's being resilient, right? Like it's different things to different people. One of the things that's very interesting to talk about, like where we're at with security today, Michael, is Microsoft skipped Patch Tuesday. What is up with that?
Yeah,
I don't remember a time in its inception where, first of all, Microsoft could skip Patch Tuesday, and then they did that this week, and they were like, yeah, you know what? We're skipping it. That's it. No explanation. They were going to delay it with no explanation. They updated the post. It's one sentence in the post. They're like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, there's no February 2017. Yeah, no patch, which is prolific for me because when I when I worked for Tenable and we would cover Patch Tuesday.
Oh yeah, right.
I have one of the best titled blog posts of my career, From Microsoft with Love, because the second Tuesday of every month, every once in a while, falls on Valentine's Day. And I was like, from Microsoft with Love, here's 23 security bulletins from Microsoft. We
love you that much.
In 2017, it fell on Valentine's Day. No love. We got no love, or maybe less love from Microsoft because we didn't get a Patch Tuesday. How are have we progressed where it doesn't matter? Do patches not matter as much now? I'm blown away by this story.
I gotta tell you what. You know what? I've been sitting here pondering that. I don't have clear insight because we keep talking about things like the basics and that patches are the basics.
Right.
I'll tell you. Let me twist it this way. Do you see? I get excited when I look at pure play security cloud business to business places because they're virtualized largely. They have a single instance, and if they need to do a patch, they can do it on the fly. And I compare that to the messes that you and I used to have to maintain where, I mean, thankfully in my day, we had batch windows. So at least I shut down the computers every night and could apply patches. But now in this always on world, but by the way, that server's trying to do 15 different things for 35 different groups. How do you patch it? I mean, like I've looked at a lot of these reports and I'm like, okay, so there's, 1,000 vulnerabilities. Well, how many patches is that? How many things might that break? Who's going to test it? When the hell do you think we're actually going to do it? How do we know we're going to do it right? Like, I think there's a lot of confusion around this. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm now seeing situations where we can patch the way we always wanted to, and it works great. And I'm seeing some of this legacy stuff, and I'm wondering if maybe we're misplacing our attention on it, as opposed to figuring out better ways to segment out our networks and specialize in the things that we need to be able to do, right?
I think a lot of it is the push to Azure as the Microsoft example, Amazon AWS. The way that you look at patches is different. I think you roll out in rather than have that one server that does 15 different things and serves 20 different groups, you now have an individual server. So you have 20 different servers, and they're serving each of the 20 different groups, and you can roll out patches. And if it doesn't work, you can roll it back. Or you can spin up a new patch instance, test it very easily, and then roll it out. That's the DevOps world that I think we're all living in today.
Yeah,
and
I think it's exciting.
Maybe that makes it, I don't want to say that makes it okay for Microsoft to skip a Patch Tuesday, but it allows organizations to be more streamlined. Now, having said that, my concern is it's still, I think you're in the minority today if you're rolling out patches in that fashion. I think there's a lot of organizations that have, let's use Microsoft as an example, such a large Microsoft infrastructure that they can't just throw a switch and be like, oh, you know what,
Right.
tomorrow we're going to deploy everything in the cloud. Yeah, it's no problem. Like, separate desktop patches from server and application-based patches from each other. Even with server and application, you can't just like throw a switch and be like, yeah, you know what, we got like 5,000 or 10,000 servers in the organization. Like, tomorrow they're all going to be cloud-based. Like, you can't do that. It's going to take time to go
Exactly
there.
right. Yeah, and you're going to have to prioritize it, right,
Yeah.
and measure it.
Enterprise security, we talked about, Gartner actually said that 5% of the organizations today are using a CASB, or Cloud Application Security Broker, Cloud Access Security Broker. Thank you. And they're like, in, I don't know, 5 years, it's going to be 80%, 85%. Like, I think it's going to grow faster. John Strain actually said it's going to be faster than that. And I kind of agree. Yeah, it's going to be way faster than that. And it's going to be a lot of work to get there. But I think it makes this patching thing like everything we said in 2003 when we were like, oh my God, there's worms running around the network. We need to patch everything. And everyone was like, holy crap, we can't patch everything. It's going to take that 15 or 20 years to get to the point where we're like, yeah, no problem. No problem.
Patched. Yep.
And that's because there's so much legacy. In Microsoft environment, there's so much legacy. Like, dude, think about it. We went down like memory lane multiple times in this show, right? Like, think about like late 90s. Like, you were like converting from Windows whatever to Windows 351 for
351.
servers. What was it?
What
was it 351 for servers to NT? There was like a 351. What was it called? Shit, I don't even remember now. And then it was NT40, and then 2000, and like, think about that whole progression. Like, it's going to take us time to migrate those legacy applications and servers over to the new model. And once we get there, I think it's going to be better. But as security professionals, we can't be like, yeah, the solution is just convert everything. Like, that takes time.
Well, and I think that so there's two things I'm finding that are really kind of cool. First of which is the security folks using this
351 for work groups. That's what it was.
That's what it was. That's exactly what it was. Yeah. I think that when we see people, wasn't it 311? Was it 311 work groups to 351 for NT?
It's so long ago we don't freaking remember.
Someone's going to correct us on it.
We all have like Jack Daniel syndrome right now.
Well, and I got to tell you, like, I have this image of what the computer bank looked like down in the server room, and like I had that one server
like a
that
rock
like I could
and some
experiment
sticks,
on,
or like the string with the stick, and we had to like make it go back and forth to make fire, to make the power to power the servers. I
had to feed the gerbils every night to make sure they kept running, so everything worked. Yeah. So what I was gonna say is I'm starting now too to see a lot of people say, oh, I can segment my network out better, right? This is stuff we talked about for years, but it got expensive to do it, or it got complicated to manage it. Now we're getting a lot better at that, number one. Number two, I think that this is an opportunity, like, identity management is hot again. I mean, it's always been hot, but it was always confusing for people.
Go there, right?
Sorry, but let me just say this part then. Right, so like when you got your CASBs and you've got all your identity solutions now looking at the cloud stuff, we're actually getting traction in the enterprise. Let's go back to our early password conversation. People are saying, guys, stop. I can't do this. It's too much. Yeah, we're starting to see solutions now, and people are embracing those. And so I think that what we're going to see with some of this move is I've talked about this for years. There's a functional shift. So like, are we going to get rid of firewalls? Maybe. Are we going to get rid of a firewall-like functionality? No. Is it going to shift? Yes. Will it be smaller? Yes. Will it be handled differently? Yes. So will we still call it a firewall? No, probably not. Is that okay? Yeah, it's fine. But to your point, if we take our time and we prioritize, man, we can make a lot of gains now in a really short period of time with those things that we wanted to do. We just got to be mindful of it.
Yeah, it's funny. I was having this conversation a year or more ago with someone I worked with who said, like, security is basically going to change. And it's going to be completely different. And I slightly disagreed. And I'm like, it's a lot of the fundamentals that we've learned over the years, but it's applied differently. And I think
that's exactly what I was just going to say.
Yeah, it's like cloud and DevOps, like that enables us to do security, I think, better. But The fundamentals of like what you were saying, Michael, with segmentation, fundamentally the same. The fundamentals of like least privilege, fundamentally the same, just implemented different. So
think about that for a second. Least privilege. So least privilege. I have worked at way too many sites where you go say, well, how many roles do you have? So 1,500. Well, how many employees do you have? 1,400. Well, I'm sorry. What?
No,
there's a disconnect there. But again, in the last couple of years, I've talked to people that have gotten that down. Why? Because we can be more fine-grained now, because we can have those better controls, because I'm not worried about the disk space or the overload or the memory or the performance. All those problems went away. So I think you've said it right. Fundamentals will remain the same. Maybe they'll get a little bit better, but like the point is, security is not going to change as we know it. We're going to finally be able to do some of the stuff we've been wanting to do for the last 20 years.
No, I
some
agree.
people wanted it for longer.
I think
and
it's a
that's going to
positive
enable
thing.
new stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's great. It's kind of like looking at IoT. We have an IoT.
Yeah, I'm going to go there. You were in my head, Michael, as usual. Bruce Schneier is still at RSA pushing for regulation of IoT. And I think this whole concept is very interesting. I think it's very interesting that given recent events where government organizations are bringing lawsuits to IoT device manufacturers, that Schneier is still pushing for like more stringent and really like heavy government regulation. And I never fingered Bruce Schneier to be pushing for a lot of these government, like heavy government in like big government is essentially what this really kind of has a dotted line to. I think that's kind of interesting given Bruce's history with encryption and the whole thing, and a lot of his articles about, basically security over the years have not been really akin to big government. With this particular issue, I mean, he's like marching down the path of like big government, and I'm not a huge fan of big government. I think it's a double-edged sword, right?
I don't think anybody would ever accuse me of being a fan of government at all.
But like, it's a huge double-edged sword, right? Like, but he's like really marching down the path. Now,
all right.
Now I want to step back and say I admire Bruce to be able to be a figure to point this issue out and make it a big issue, make everyone think about it, and make everyone think about the solutions, right? Like, that's admirable. Like, don't get me wrong.
It may actually be his goal, by the way.
Yeah, and,
right?
and that's good.
I mean,
here we are on the show talking about it, right? Which I think is a good thing.
I mean, he was already a legend in the field in the 90s when I really started getting involved in this. So he's got a long history there. And I think, especially when it comes to crypto, he's forgotten more than I'll ever know.
Yes. Some will dispute some of his things about crypto.
I've seen that, but he still did a lot of fundamental stuff in and around it.
What's interesting about this particular article about his talk at RSA is Schneier believes that by getting technologists involved in policy could create a viable career path like public interest attorneys. It would also stop policy writers and security experts from talking past each other via like a la last year's Apple versus FBI saga. So like what Bruce is advocating for is that technologists get involved with policy decisions. I somewhat disagree with him on that, and not at a very basic level, more at a higher level. Like, I think that technologists play a role in advising. I think that, in my experience with regulation, we've been through the gamut on Security Weekly and in the security community. I also, as most of us know, as I sit here and smoke cigars, we've been through the gamut on regulation in the cigar industry as well. There are people who can speak at a very technical level in security in cigars, right? There are also people that can speak at a political level on the issues as well. I think that those two groups need to work together. I don't necessarily agree with his recommendation, like, that should be one group. You know what I'm saying, Michael? Like you and I can talk at a very technical level.
We can
go testify in front of Congress, but we need to work together, technical folks with those that know the political system, in order to like basically what we say on Startup Security Weekly, like make the world a better place, right?
Yeah, for the children. As long as
For
we're
the
doing
children. It's for the children.
Yeah, I mean, I was seeing it. All right, so this is not directed at Bruce. This is more of a comment on this. What I've started to notice is people that have been involved with security for as long as we have, some that have been involved longer, start to feel a sense of angst right now around a lot of things. And they're like, hold on, I've seen this before. I didn't like the movie the first time, and now you've put it on rerun. And so what happens then is
tried to remake it like Ghostbusters. Just bad.
Yeah.
Just bad.
and so what happens then is we say, okay, hold on. They didn't listen to me last time, so I got an idea. Let's force it. And it's that shortcut. And so what's interesting is I don't see enough analysis to say, why didn't people listen before? Did we use the wrong analogy? Did we go with the wrong approach? Hell, did we even try to explain it? Did we do anything that translated it? And so when I look at things like this, I remember there was another thing that came up where Shania or somebody else said something along the lines of, look, it's provable people can't handle risk. We don't tolerate it well. That's actually not what the science says. The science has no such conclusion. The science actually says if I present you something in a context that you don't understand, you're not going to do very well at it. But the minute I change the context to something more familiar, you tend to outperform other people. So we're actually quite good at risk. And if you ever doubt that, just go look around. I mean, the world is remarkable, and the things we've done are remarkable. Does it mean that we necessarily make good decisions on an emotional basis, on a consistent basis? No, I buy that. So the thing is, we kind of look at it and we go, right, all these companies are stupid. You and I have talked about this, and I remember it because you really educated me on this, looking at, okay, Paul, we've talked about D-Link having these problems or whoever for years, and you're like, Michael, they built the chipset, it worked, they printed off literally millions of them, and until that supply is usurped, they're good. Okay. By the way, though, I come back to it and I go, so show me the harm, right? I mean, like I get a little cranky when I see people conflate credit card fraud with identity theft. They are separate. I will accept identity theft sucks, and that's a problem, and we should keep looking for ways to combat that. And of course, anybody involved in the payment card industry is always happy to find ways to reduce fraud. Great. But hold on for a second here. Of all these things that are bad, I mean, we get the obligatory story a year of I heard a strange man's voice in my kid's room, and they hacked into the CCTV or whatever. Yep, cool. And like relative to all of these other things, it can be like I guess the question I always ask is this: Where's the actual harm? And no, I'm not saying I'm waiting for that catastrophic event to happen, and please understand, I'm never wishing for it. I'm just kind of looking at it going, maybe it's not as bad as we think it is.
Yeah, but I think that's to kind of back up Bruce on his claims of going towards like doing nothing versus what we're doing today, seeing government organizations putting their powers behind regulating or enforcing whatever they can enforce against IoT manufacturers, to like the third stage is what Bruce is talking about, like a new government agency, like really getting the hammer down on regulation.
That makes me nervous.
I can see where he's going. To speak to your point, Michael, like things are getting worse. Mariah was just a precursor to what could happen.
What was the harm from it?
The harm was the internet as a whole went down for a certain period of time. However, people are building on that attack, and the concern is from those of us that have been researching this problem for a long time is that it's not just people are going to take advantage of these devices to take the internet down or take sections of the internet down. They're going to use it to invade people's privacy. They're going to use it to make money and take advantage of people's devices, ransomware their devices so that they have to pay money.
Okay, I think those things are fair. I think that's fair.
And I think that's what like researchers that are like, yeah, I can go find like another article I had in here, like 170 million exposed devices. Like that's all well and good. The trend that we're really concerned about, like the growing trends, are that attackers are using it increasingly for more and more evil things. And if we don't do something about that now, it's going to continue to get worse. To be
Let
quite
me-
honest, like Bruce Schneier said that, Michael, probably 2 or 3 years ago. He said the problem's going to get worse before it gets better.
It always gets that way.
Mirai backed him up 100%. We covered that article on the show, and I'm like, I
know.
agree with Bruce. I'm like, I've been very close to this problem because Larry and I happened to write a book about technology. Not even really, I mean, it was about hacking, but not in the same sense of hacking like someone's going to hack my baby monitor to spy on me. It was the hacking in the we just want to understand things because we're curious light. That brought forth, oh my God, if someone was evil, like really bad things could happen. Now bad things are happening. They're not in the scale or like impact level where it's really hitting, like we're just on the cusp of that. And I think that's why Bruce is out there going, we really need to solve this problem now, because if you thought things like got worse already, he's like, no, that's just the beginning. And I agree with him at that point. I think things are going to get way worse than they are now. Not to be like all doom and gloom, but that's one of the things that makes me kind of back up as much as crazy as it sounds. But
my alternate take on that is, if they're going to get worse than they are now, I'm still sitting here in the middle of it. I'd like to think capable of comprehending it, saying, okay, but how bad is it really? And here's what I can come back to. I'd like to see some conversation around, so is there an actual marketplace inefficiency that says the consumers voting with their wallets and the businesses playing to those signals are really disregarding everything at that alarming pace that we're just all oblivious to it? Or are they maybe more accurate than we are, and that there will be some missteps and some problems? And as we cover in the startup realm, that's going to create a really cool opportunity for somebody who can move fast. Now, that's number one.
Well, I think you're along that point, Michael. I think that time frame is a critical factor, right? Like, I think that
I agree with that. That's why I've got a second point.
I think Bruce thinks that like the timetable is really short, and I think to your point, especially with startups and the way technology progresses, like we may have some time, right? Like I think that if we look at back to my previous point on shows, like electricity, like eventually at some point, like that was in every home, and now there are standards that continually evolve to protect us from that. I see IoT and this whole device thing progressing in the same kind of pattern. But
well, I think I brought this up before. So I've got two thoughts, and I want to make a second point. Thought number one, sprinkler systems. I know I've talked about this before, but I'm so fascinated by it because the industry came together some number of years ago and said, you know what, we need to standardize on voltage, we need to standardize on size, we need to standardize on fittings. By the way, they're all still highly competitive, but you can mix and match. I don't know if you know this. If you have a sprinkler system in your house, you can mix and match all the pieces to the way that you want. Mm-hmm. And that's actually been okay for everybody. And now they compete on any number of things, but it's not as proprietary. I think there's still an opportunity for IoT and related types of things to go that particular direction. Here's the second thought relative to that. I'm going to get around. Which was the one that just blew up? The Galaxy 7, Note 7, whatever the Samsung device was.
Yeah, it was the Note. It was a Note.
How long did it take them to deprecate that completely out? Months. Really
it was
not a lot
quick,
of time.
And airlines confiscated those
airlines confiscated. They had burn bags. Yeah,
and they would take your battery out was one of the things, because the battery on the Samsung devices is, unlike Apple products, is removable.
Now,
that's a totally different subject.
And keep in mind too, right? All the carriers said, by the way, we're just your phone's gonna be dead in like 30 days. We're deactivating it and sending a kill signal or whatever they did. The point to it is, I'm still going to go back to something I've learned from you, right? Questions I ask any startup now, it tells me they've got any sort of an embedded device, right? The real IoT. I always say, where did you get the chip? How are you able to update it? And did you do any quality checks on it? And usually they go, I don't know, no, what and what. So this is my second point. Outcomes. In fact, this is something I've been working on relative to Straight Talk and looking at outcomes. We get really, really focused on outputs, and we get really, really focused on process. And so my fear with regulation is that we're going to be really, really focused on process and outputs, and we're going to completely disregard the outcomes. And the outcomes it's kind of like when I say to somebody, right, it's the difference between a policy requirement and a standard. And they go, oh, my policy is encryption. Nope, can't be. That's a standard. They can have a process or a procedure for that, or a guideline. But your actual policy needs to talk about your need to protect confidential information. It cannot stipulate encryption and be a legitimate policy because you've dictated a solution instead of defining the outcome. If we can have good conversations and start to put together a set of outcomes, policy level, you need to be able to auto update. You need to be able to be taken off the network if there was a problem. You need to be able to connect and interconnect with these other types of things. I'm behind regulations at that point.
Well, look, let's face facts.
I'm not sure I'm going to be behind regulations. I said I'd be behind regulations. Don't hold me to that. I know it's on tape.
No, I know.
I'm rescinding it. I may not like them anyway.
I'll back you up, Michael. Businesses are going to do what's most profitable, right? However, when the risk is high enough that there are fines, they're going to come into compliance. It goes back to cyber insurance, right? Like I was just meeting with an HR representative to be in compliance with local state laws and federal laws for businesses in general, completely separate of cyber, right? You want to say, like, I've done these things just in case, like, I have an insurance policy and I'm not able to meet the guidelines, I'm going to do these things. I think that IoT security is eventually going to reach a point where they're so ubiquitous that you're going to have to worry about insurance. You're going to have to worry about maybe federal regulations in some way, shape, form, or fashion, right? Like there's guidelines, there's standards, there's things like you have to comply with, there's things you should comply with. But I think that the state in general is going to be, if I make a device, it's going to be in someone's home, and this is or business, right? There are going to have to be certain things that I'm going to take into consideration. One of those things is going to have to be security. If I don't do that, the risk is going to be so great that I'm going to either pay huge fines or maybe be out of business. So I might as well take those things into consideration now, and that's going to be cheaper than the outcomes that are going to be in the onset if something bad happens in the future, right?
All right. So there's no better setup for people to watch Startup Security Weekly tomorrow.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk all about cyber insurance. It's what always geeks me out about it is it's my background. So I want to point out a couple of things. When we talk about regulations and fines, the idea is you're foisting a negative externality back on the company. So the idea is company doesn't have to bear that cost. So the government's going to step in and say, I will force those costs back on you, greedy company. There is literature and science to suggest it's good, and there's a bunch of stuff to suggest it's not, and everybody has an opinion on it. And my opinion is, show me the situation, tell me the problem you're trying to solve, and then we can have a good conversation about it. Now, where I liked where you were going with that before we even have to bring in regulation is, companies are definitely driven for profit, but I don't think that they're nameless, evil creatures that are going to kill the world to make a profit. I think some do.
No,
I think, though, that as customers become more demanding and they have certain expectations, I think that we're going to see that companies are eager to respond to that, number one. Number two, I actually think that, and this will be great conversation for tomorrow, I think, and we've talked about this on this program before, first of all, I like the idea of a cyber UL. I don't know if Mudge can pull it off, but I love it as a concept. Yep. But I want to point out something a lot of people don't understand. If you buy a device in your house and it has UL on it, it just means Underwriter Labs listed it. That's it. It doesn't mean they tested it. There's a listing and there's a testing, and they're different, and they have different requirements. And that's okay. Like I'm not problematic with it. It's just like when people automatically go to, and it means, no, it doesn't necessarily mean all those things. Number one. Number two, I actually think the insurance industry is going to be poised to drive more change in security than anything else. And it's because of their needs to get into the actuarial aspects of it. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about tomorrow with our guests in looking at, their understanding, because they're right at the nexus of cyber and risk. and I'm starting to notice a new trend. I don't know, Paul, if you're seeing this yet. A lot of organizations are saying, okay, I've been doing cyber for a long time. We need to go, right? We've heard it typically called enterprise risk management, but people are starting now to look at it and say, we should probably all get kind of on the same page. Cyber insurance is going to start driving that for people. And I think that there's a certain set of questions that people are going to ask. But what I'll say, and this is, I know we're going to talk about this tomorrow. Insurance is a really valid mechanism, and classic insurance is you have something that is a low risk. It's a high risk but a low probability. So its impact is very high, but its likelihood of happening is very low. And you spread the risk out using an insurance pool and all sorts of other stuff. And the guys tomorrow can give us a lot of details on that. So I think insurance is going to drive it, but I don't think people are turning to insurance because they don't know better or it's whatever else. Like I think that there's a certain number of things that are likely to happen. And then what'll happen, in fact, I'll leave it with this. I know Scott, who's going to be on our show, he's got a fantastic example that really captured me the first time we talked around maritime risk about 100 years ago and what people thought was completely impossible and that commerce was going to die and there was nothing we can do. Flash forward to today, that didn't happen. And so I think that we have more to be optimistic about than not. I do not share the same outlook that Bruce has. I think his insights are valid. I think his concerns are valid. And I think that he's been out there for 20 or 30 years now explaining these things and sometimes feels like they're falling on deaf ears. And if they're falling on deaf ears, a lot of people then look to the power of the state to say, just go force it, make it happen. The risk of forcing it, making it happen is that we don't focus on outcomes, clear understanding of the problem, clear understanding of the better situation. We go to things that are easily discernible with checklists and processes that may not actually get us where we want to go, or they punish people from doing good stuff. One last piece, though. I saw this, and and maybe I'll throw it in for our show tomorrow. Something has been making the rounds lately to say you can be for innovation and regulation at the same time. Now, I'm pretty clear on not liking innovation, I love innovation. I'm not liking regulation. I completely agree with that statement. Regulations are nothing more than constraints. Constraints free creativity. So, like we look at all the banking regulations. My argument with those is that they created very, very creative people that hid a lot of really bad things. But you can have both. You can totally have regulations and innovation. No question about that, especially from a startup perspective. So, I just don't think we're at that stage yet. And I'm a little fearful that our government doesn't yet comprehend cyber or information security, or whatever you want to call it, to a level where we could actually put together cogent legislation in a way that worked. And if we think that we're going to get...
that's the most prolific thing, Michael, right there is what you
then
just
I should
said.
stop.
Yeah,
mic drop. Done.
Right there. Mic drop. Right there. That's the concern from so many of us, right?
Well,
they don't understand it. And if
one more piece,
but if regulation is enacted based on a misunderstanding or not understanding of all the facts and details, that can be a recipe for disaster.
Oh, completely agree. Number one. And number two, then, this thought, we'll have one agency empowered. No. Go look at how many agencies are fighting right now. You won't. All you're going to do is create a new gigantic behemoth that's going to suck power, and then everybody else is going to fight it for power. No. Less, more transparency, less stuff, stricter. Let's see where it goes. I think the government's got a great role in exposing stuff and in structuring a conversation, and I'm happy to have that with anybody anytime they want.
Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching to Paul's Security Weekly. That concludes this episode. See everyone next week.